landmark rises as power from a pioneer source begins to flood through the countryside. It is the nation's first privately financed and operated atomic power plant.
That's right, nuclear power.
Here is Dr. Atom. The nuclear reactor may be substituted where heat is now provided by coal or petroleum.
From the time the first commercial reactor came online in 1957, it's been promoted as a clean, safe, cheap energy source. A message delivered with a can-do optimism.
The future supplying of electric power to entire cities is far from impossible.
But how committed are we really to nuclear power today? To find out, I've traveled from Wyoming to the Watts Bar nuclear plant in Tennessee, where a single reactor has been operating since 1996. Deep inside the plant, an army of more than 3,000 workers is completing a second reactor, which will generate power for an additional 650,000 homes. So this is the heart of the system right here.
This is the reactor building, and under the reactor head is where the nuclear fission takes place.
Brian Briotti is a construction manager here.
The difference between nuclear power and like the fossil fuels is fission make heat, unlike coal burners where you burn coal or oil burners where you burn oil. The difference between a coal-fired plant and a nuclear plant is what you do to heat the water, turn it into steam, and run it back to the turbine building to turn a generator.
So basically all this is just a really fancy way to boil water.
It is, absolutely.
It's awe-inspiring to know that just below us, a controlled nuclear reaction will heat water in the core to nearly 600 degrees Fahrenheit. And it'll keep running for months at a time, shutting down only to refuel.
We're very fortunate. Very few people, even in the industry, can walk up to a reactor head and be this close without it being shielded with lead. We're the only nuclear plant in the United States that's currently under construction.
In fact, this reactor will be the first one to come online in more than 15 years. In 1974, President Nixon projected that America would have 1,000 nuclear plants by the beginning of the 21st century. He wasn't even close. Today, there are just 104 nuclear plants in operation. So what happened? For one thing, construction costs have skyrocketed. There's also the risk of catastrophe.
An accident at a nuclear power plant. A feed water pump broke down this morning, automatically shutting down the 3 Mile nuclear power plant.
3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and most recently, Fukushima. They're all chilling reminders of what can happen when an accident at a nuclear plant spirals out of control, potentially leading to a dangerous release of radioactivity. No new American plants have even been ordered since 1978. Watts Bar's Unit 2 reactor is the only nuclear plant under active construction here today, finishing a job that started in 1972.
This is the actual Unit 2 control room, and we'll be operating this commercial operation a little over a year.
I met up with Adam Scales, the operations manager at Watts Bar, to ask him the question that's been on my mind all day.
This reactor, when it comes online, is going to be the first reactor in the 21st century. Is this just the first step, or is this pretty much the end of the road?
No, I see this as just a first step. We can't afford the public to lose confidence in what we do. We're very concerned that the public understands what we do, and we're not just protecting the plant, but them.
Adam may seem confident, but building a new plant today is a harder sell than ever before. Besides Watts Bar, only 2 other plants have even broken ground. They're still years away from generating electricity. In the meantime, our demand for energy keeps going up. For decades, nuclear and coal have been the traditional, stable workhorses that power the grid. But we're increasingly turning to a fossil fuel that's seen as both safer and cleaner. Natural gas. Newly discovered fields in the U.S. led to a boom in the 1950s, driven by growing industrial and consumer needs. The expansion of our underground gas pipeline system was fast-tracked just to keep up. It's an engineering marvel that can stretch around the Earth 12 times. But even this isn't enough to deliver gas to every corner of America. Which is why this behemoth, 3 football fields long, is arriving in Boston after a 5-day journey from gas-rich Trinidad. This is the Neptune. Its cargo is kept at a bone-splintering minus 260 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, natural gas is transformed into liquefied natural gas, or LNG, 600 times smaller in volume. Her final destination is Everett Terminal. Frank Cadillac manages the facility, keeping Boston fully supplied with natural gas.
Domestic gas is produced primarily in the Gulf Coast, and we're about as far away as you can get from those producing fields.
You guys are the last to get natural gas if it's coming through the pipes.
And
everyone else is taking the gas.
And everybody else is taking gas along the way. All the big cities in the Northeast, all those places are taking the gas before it gets to Boston. In the really cold days, sometimes there isn't much left.
In Massachusetts, nearly half the homes use gas for heating in addition to electricity. In the dead of winter, when furnaces are cranked up high, there's simply not enough gas coming through the pipes to go around.
Why isn't it an option just to build out more pipes?
To build a pipeline 1,500 miles, 2,000 miles, and only use it a few days of the year, that's not really economical. It would cost billions and billions of dollars to build additional pipeline capacity, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense.
So to supplement the gas coming through the pipeline, Boston relies on tankers like the Neptune. For now, there's simply no other way to get it here.
Think of this tanker as a giant freezer full of concentrated bottled energy. Getting it safely into Boston is no simple task. But as you can see, we're not alone.
Security is tight. We're passing within a mile of downtown.
When we started bringing these ships in 40 years ago, we always had an escort around the vessel. In those days, it was more safety-oriented.
George Lee is a veteran docking pilot. He's guided LNG tankers into Boston's inner harbor more than 150 times. These massive ships are coming here from Trinidad, but also from Egypt and Yemen.
After 9/11, security issues have come into play, so there's even more assets out there keeping a buffer zone around the ship to keep all other vessels and people away from the ship while it's coming in.
Getting a massive tanker like this into a busy port like Boston requires tugboats, coast guards, helicopters, a whole crew. But it all comes down to these guys who are the quarterbacks.
Justice, easy 90 to port.
George and the ship's captain have to execute the biggest parking job I've ever seen while backing the tanker under the Tobin Bridge. The clearance can be as little as 5 feet. It's a maneuver that city planners clearly didn't have in mind when the bridge was built over a half-century ago.
I noticed that we're turning away from our destination. Why are we doing that?
So that when the vessel's finally moored at the dock, it's bow out, which makes departure and emergency easier.
3 hours after it entered Boston Harbor, the Neptune is safely docked, and George's job is finished for today. Over the next 24 hours, the gas will be carefully offloaded. These critical shipments replenish the pipes and fuel New England's largest gas-fired power plant, conveniently located right next to the dock.
So if this wasn't here, you'd have a lot of cold, angry people.
We'd have a lot of people cold and angry, and also in the dark.
Tomorrow, the Neptune heads back to Trinidad to pick up another load of liquefied natural gas for the Northeast.
Like clockwork, LNG tankers come into Boston more than 60 times a year. But in terms of quenching our national thirst for energy, all this, just a drop in the bucket.
Especially since our love affair with natural gas is on the rise. And no wonder. It's the cleanest burning of our fossil fuels, and it's relatively cheap. To keep us supplied, we really need a secure, plentiful source right here at home. Penn State geologist Terry Engelder believes he's found one. He's taking me deep into the woods near Ithaca, New York, to show me.
Shale right here. Let me pop my skis off and get a sample of this. This is a piece of the shale right in here. I've broken it.
Okay.
Put that up to your nose.
Hey, it smells pretty good. It smells kind of sweet.
That's the natural gas.
That's the gas. Terry's an expert on the gas found in a massive shale rock deposit called the Marcellus, which is buried thousands of feet directly below us. It extends south from New York through western Pennsylvania and beyond. For more than a century, people have known there was gas here, but they didn't know quite how much.
Boy, magnificent. Look at that.
Whoa, that's beautiful.
In 2008, Terry stunned the energy world when he estimated the size of the reserve in the Marcellus. He's brought along his notebook with the original calculations.
The results suggested that there was 500 trillion cubic feet.
500 trillion.
If
Terry's right, and all this gas could be tapped, it could be enough to meet all of America's natural gas needs for more than 20 years.
This brought a lot of operators to the state of Pennsylvania.
So it became an old-fashioned gold rush.
A 21st century gold rush that really is big enough to affect America's energy portfolio.
We collected the GPS locations of all the shale gas rigs throughout the country, from the Barnett Shale in Texas, to the Fayetteville Shale in Arkansas, to the Woodford Shale, the Haynesville Shale, Eagle Ford, the Marcellus, and more. This rapid growth tells the story of just how widespread the gas rush has been. But to see how it's transformed the landscape, you've got to get closer, much closer. Here's a satellite photo of Boonville, a small farming community in western Arkansas, before the prospectors arrived. And this is how it looks today, a giant pincushion of drill sites. Major gas shale deposits can be found in 28 different states. If you add them all up, you get a gas reserve that's even bigger than the world's largest oil reserve in Saudi Arabia. So what's the catch? How to get it safely out of the ground. You've probably heard of the controversy around hydraulic fracturing, also called fracking. It uses millions of gallons of liquid pumped into the ground to fracture the rock and release the gas. Since the drilling began, it's been linked to everything from being able to light your kitchen tap on fire, to health effects in livestock and people, to environmental damage at the well sites.
The controversy largely comes because there have been some accidents spilled on the surface. For example, and the water does have additives in it.
Chemicals like benzene and diesel and hydrochloric acid.
That's right. And it also contains some of the natural components of the rock. Some of these might be heavy metals, for example, that come back to the surface from the rock. So that obviously management of this water becomes really critical.
Questions have also been raised about how much gas can actually be retrieved from formations like the Marcellus. But that hasn't slowed down the industry's phenomenal growth. In the last 7 years, shale gas has gone from next to nothing to supplying 20% of our natural gas needs.
America was going to have to import more and more gas from overseas. Now, what the gas shale revolution has done is it's allowed America to think in terms of being energy independent, but that means going after this natural gas in somebody's backyard.
We're lucky that our nation has such vast energy resources. But how long before that luck runs out? In 1931, Thomas Edison confided to his friend Henry Ford, "We are like tenant farmers, chopping down the fence around our house for fuel, when we should be using nature's inexhaustible sources of energy, sun, wind, and tide."
The father of the grid recognized the danger of using finite resources to feed his creation. And we're still searching for clean, renewable sources of power to satisfy our boundless desire for electricity.
But unlike Edison, we've got some very impressive technology these days to help with the search. Each of these spinning points of light represents the readings from thousands of sensors. This is a high-tech treasure map for America's fastest growing renewable resource. Wind. Across the country, over 36,000 wind turbines dot the landscape. We converted the data produced by those sensors, revealing stunningly complex wind patterns sped up 10,000 times.
All of this data provides a picture of what the wind conditions and weather conditions are like across the country. With the new technologies that have been developed in the last 10 or 15 years, it's really become possible to predict with quite good accuracy how windy it's going to be at any location in the country.
In Albany, New York, I've come to see Dr. Michael Brower, who uses this mapping data to help identify new wind project sites.
Looking at the simulation, why are certain regions better for building wind projects than others?
The main wind project development area for the U.S. right now is in the Great Plains. Really a whole band from central Texas on up to the Dakotas. Almost all of this area is very windy most of the time. And there are also some nice terrain features in this area, hills, small ridges, mesas, and so forth, which help to concentrate the wind. The problem along the West Coast is that there are mountains which are blocking the path. And so the atmosphere looks for channels. One of the main gaps is the Columbia River Valley, which is the only sea level passage through the Cascade Mountains in the Pacific Northwest.
So the Columbia River Gorge is basically a funnel, and so all the wind shoots through that funnel, creating a wind superhighway.
Exactly, and in fact, that area has been a region of very active wind development.
I've come to the Columbia River Gorge myself to get a closer look at what's driving this phenomenal growth of wind power.
Today, the winds are calm, which is good news for me because I'm standing 300 feet off the ground. The only place to go from here is down.
At the Windy Flats Wind Farm, high above the Columbia, I've hooked up with a team of experts who are doing a safety check on this massive turbine.
Nice job, Yule. I'm not going to look down. No looking down.
My life is literally hanging by a thread. Luckily, I'm up here with Randy Deputy, who knows exactly what he's doing.
Woo! This is crazy. I can't believe this is your job. How many times have you done this?
I have about 3,000 hours of rope access work.
So you've been dangling in this position for 3,000 hours of your life?
Yeah.
That's insane.
Randy's work takes him all around the country. He's one of 4,000 technicians who keep these high-tech turbines spinning.
So what are you looking for when you come down to inspect these blades?
For any damages in this outer coat, which is called a gel coat, it's kind of a protective layer that keeps the fiberglass safe from UV radiation.
Randy's job is to make sure the turbines work flawlessly. Each one is a self-contained power plant, generating enough electricity for more than 1,000 homes.
We'll do inspections to the leading edge of the blade because it's what breaks the wind. So any erosion on the blade, it's always going to start on the leading edge.
The view is surreal. Giant turbines stretching for more than 30 miles along the gorge. Some people call it an eyesore. Others call it a thing of beauty. For Randy, it's a career.
The wind farm started being developed in the Columbia River Gorge about 10 years ago. That was actually the second job my company ever worked on, was on that site when there was only 16 turbines in the entire region. And right now, it's 2,000.
So this whole area went from 16 turbines 10 years ago to about 2,000 right now. And is it continuing to grow?
On average, wind is growing 30% a year, every year.
But keeping up that pace could be tough. Many of the best untapped wind sites are far from existing transmission lines. Getting the power to customers is a challenge. But here in the Columbia River Gorge, there are already over 15,000 miles of transmission lines. The original network was built to serve the region's hydroelectric dams, which started going up in the 1930s. Now, these wind turbines can piggyback on the existing infrastructure. But most of this wind power isn't even being used in the Pacific Northwest. It's headed hundreds of miles due south to California.